Perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you for the introduction. I think I know some of you. Thank you for your time. It's great to see you. We have that many people participating today in the training, and it was good that we are doing it in association and in cooperation with the Bart Bottles team. So I think it's great to do it. I would like to explain a little bit. We are going to talk with Allison. We are going to talk about Brenne and show some images, and just to have it more of as a conversation. So if you are, shall we start, Allison?
We can start.
Perfect. So we can start. Allison, I saw you yesterday. You were on Samson&surry TV. You had a one-to-one interview with our colleague with Kyle McHugh. You talked a lot. It was part 2 actually. You talked a lot about your story, and there were a couple of things that I think I would like to know more, and I would like to know more about Brenne. It was like it's about, we are going to talk about whiskey, and before starting to ask about how does a professional ballerina start with whiskey, I would like to ask you if you remember the 2 whiskeys that are your first 2 whiskeys or your first couple of whiskeys you drank.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. And before I do, if I can just take a moment to thank each and every one of you for showing up in general and showing up during this time. I hope that you and your loved ones are all feeling healthy mentally and physically, and I hope your businesses and your economies all pick up with grace and speed. I know this has been a global experience, so it really humbles me and is such an honor to see everyone here and taking a moment to gather, and I thank you. The other thing is, if you have a sample, and I saw so many people on Instagram last night taking photos of themselves with their sample bottles, if you can, wait, and we will pour them into our glasses and experience that all together in like a very fun little community exercise. Because I figure while we're all separated, it might be nice to try and do something connected together in a single moment. So if you can wait, great. If not, I get it, it's whiskey. Cool. So on to Salvador, your question. My first whiskey was like a Dewar's and Ginger or something like that at a wedding. It was definitely a Dewar's, like a blended Scotch. And then my second whiskey, I left that wedding weekend wherever it was. I came back to New York City, and this is in the early 2000s, so well before Japanese whiskey was even a trend or anything exciting in the US. And I went to a whiskey bar, and I was like, what is the most exotic thing? And I found a Yamazaki 18 for $25 for one single pour, which as a ballerina was very, very, very expensive for something I was just going to sip. But I had a Yamazaki 18, and that I credit as being the whiskey that turned me into the crazy lover of whiskeys that I am today.
Good, and I think that it's 2 very different whiskeys. And I guess that what do you remember
Salvador,
from?
I think your internet is breaking up.
Sorry about it. Can you hear me well now?
What I remember from Yamazaki 18 was just that. And again, this is very like, second whiskey I ever experienced. So I didn't know then what I know now. I remember it being so remarkably different than the Dewar's. And I didn't know if it was different because of its sense of place, geography of where it was made, or what techniques they were using, or what. I really didn't know. But I remembered, not a knock to my ex-husband, but I remember I went and ordered it with my ex-husband, and I joked that I kept the whiskey and let him go. So it was certainly life-changing. I loved the taste of this whiskey. Yeah.
Yeah. And how this ended up, and how you started with in the world of whiskey, because I think you explain us the 2 whiskeys very different, and that attracted your attention.
Yeah, I was so again, this was early 2000s. I couldn't understand at that point in time why it was so different. So it started me on quite a journey, and I read everything, and I traveled. I went to Japan, I went to India, I went to various parts of Europe. And I was really just I went to Scotland and worked with Dave steward at Balvenie for a little bit, and I was just trying to understand, you know, how whiskeys were made, and could you use the concept of terroir, which is a concept everyone talks about in wine, but is finally starting to have a place in conversation in whiskey. I was wondering, did terroir exist in single malts made outside of Scotland? And terroir is basically the French word that means having a sense of place in the smell and in the taste of a product. So it's why a sommelier in Japan or in the Netherlands or in New York City can open up a bottle of wine, and just by right? Oh, okay, now can you hear me? Great. So this concept of terroir was really fascinating to me. And personally, I wanted to know if we could buy as consumers, and Nicola Risk, who's on this call, we were both living in New York City around this time too. And we were just these like absorbing whiskey crazy people and trying to understand, could we as consumers purchase whiskeys that had been made outside of Scotland that had a sense of place in the taste. So I originally thought, I'll start an import company and I will import these types of whiskeys. And then when I really started traveling and meeting with all these beautiful distilleries, and even Kavalan before they had, or just as they were breaking ground, Tasmanian whiskeys, I was so blessed that I got to meet so many people very early on. And I just realized that everyone had their own vision, and it wasn't exactly aligned with what my vision was. So I realized maybe I should just go start my own whiskey instead of trying to ask other people to adjust their dreams to fit into mine so I could import them.
And if you mentioned that it was important for you, the terroir, and this is a very French word, terroir. So that's why you decided to go to France to look for the terroir, and how could you express the terroir in the whiskey world, or it was just a coincidence? How did you end up in France in general?
Yeah, especially as a New Yorker and an American, and at a time when American craft whiskey distilling was really about to explode. I knew a lot of those early craft whiskey distillers, and again, what they were doing was something different than what I wanted to do. So France was, yes, terroir is an originating French word. It's an originating French concept. I have so much respect for the rich distillation culture in France, from Armagnac to Cognac to Calvados. And I just think that they're doing some really incredible things. They were also the largest consumer of Scotch malt whiskey per capita for about 16 to 20 years in a row at the end of the 90s, early 2000s. So there was a lot of consumption being happening there, but not necessarily so much production, and no one really making a truly authentic French whiskey. There were guys making whiskey Breton or Brittany whiskeys, right? There was a guy in Corsica doing some very, very cool things, but no one was really doing 100% pure French whiskey. So I thought, why not? Why not go do this?
And it's a coincidence. You mentioned Cognac, you mentioned Armagnac or Calvados. It's a coincidence that it was Cognac, or it was white Cognac and not. I mean, Champagne might not be the right example, but Calvados or Armagnac.
I met my distiller. So my partner is a third-generation Cognac maker. They have a farm distillery. They are very opposite of me. I have no problem being the spokesperson and being out there in the limelight, and I love running business plans and creating and innovating. They just wanted to be farmers and distillers, and they want no other publicity. They want nothing else to do with the barrels. So I found these unbelievable partners who want to farm and want to distill, and they had all of the equipment there that they were making and using for Cognac, and they were willing to work with me in figuring out a truly 100% authentic, organic French whiskey.
So they were distilling Cognac, but at the same time, they were also producing whiskey by then, when you met them.
Yeah, they had a teeny tiny little production that they were just using as their house spirit, because all of their cognacs were being sold and bottled by another brand. So they just literally made it as something to enjoy and drink in their home.
And what is the connection between the barley and the grape? Because it's
yeah, they're so in bio or organic farming, you want to do crop rotation. I'm just admitting a few more people. You want to do crop rotation, so you don't want to keep planting the same things in the same place of the soil year after year after year. But when you're looking at growing vineyards, which need to stay in the ground, this distillery's vineyards stay in the ground for 30 to 40 years. The way they set up their land is vineyard, field, vineyard, field, vineyard, field, and they rotate the crops in the fields. So every year barley is grown, it's just grown in different plots of their land, essentially to put nutrients back into the soil for the vineyards. So they always grew barley, they just moved it around all the time, and still do to this day.
Okay, so I just wanted to share a picture of the barley and what you were explaining. This is something. I guess this is the barley, one of the barleys, that they are used and we use for Brenne. So everything is done in the same farm, basically.
We call this farm to table or grain to glass or seed to spirit. So 100% of everything that we use to make this whiskey is done right there at the distillery. That photo on the left, where it looks like grass, what we joke is our baby barley, was the very first photo I ever took when I went to France and met with this family. But pretty cool. And you can see how it's flanking the vineyards. Yeah, I love this photo.
This is the house, this is the chateau, as the French say, I guess.
Exactly, yeah, and the distillery is attached to the back of that, and then behind that are the vineyards and the fields.
Okay, so and you were mentioning this is where the pot still is.
Yeah. So we have fermentation tanks directly behind that door as well, and then there's like a little step up in the building. If you look at the roof, you can kind of see where it goes up. That's where our still is, and then behind that is the cellar, and then the cellar attaches to the house.
Okay.
And the color, by the way, just to call that out, the color of those doors is the color of our of the blue on the labels. So that's where that inspiration came from.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. And so everything is done in house in the farm. And you mentioned that it's all following the cognac production process in general, or how are you doing, or how is Brenne done? It's following the cognac distillation process.
So kind of an easy overview, right? So we grow 2 heirloom varietals of barley directly on site, 100% certified organic, all the way through to bottling. We ferment using a strain of yeast that this family has been using for 3 generations to ferment their grape production to turn into eau de vie for cognac. So we use the same strain of yeast for our fermentation, and when applied to this beautiful organic heirloom barley, we're getting a very floral mash. And we are fermenting in stainless steel tanks. Then we're distilling. They only have 1 still. It's not a very big operation. They have 1 still. It is not a pot still. It is an alembic Charente still. There you go. So if anyone ever cooks with Le Creuset cookware or anything like that, where you're used to having this beautiful enamel around cast iron for Le Creuset, but copper in this instance, the French are really known, especially with their alembic Charente stills, to coat them in this enamel. And this red, this classic red, is really a color that you will see repeated throughout this entire region. So, yeah, go ahead, Selby.
Sorry, I'm interested, and I think it's interesting to understand what would be the differences. You would say that distilling malted barley in a Charentese still could bring to distilling barley in a traditional whiskey pot still. Is there any kind of flavor differences that will start to generate and will start to make the difference in Brenne?
Yes, I mean, if anyone's ever tasted a whiskey done in a pot still versus a column still, or a coffee still, just by changing the still, you are automatically changing how the chemical compounds are collected and created in the distillation process. So this particular still, if you see in the back, it has that little kind of inverted triangular, exactly, that little extra globe. That by Charente still law has to be 10% of the size of the bigger globe that's underneath. So if you imagine a traditional pot still, what you typically know of for distilling single malts, it looks like a giant onion, right? And this little globe is basically a little tiny onion that sits on top of the big one. And that, when you're making a cognac, right, this still was designed for distilling grapes and fruit-based eau de vies. So you want to force more of the fruit-forward ester molecules, which is just a natural molecule that you get in the distillation process. And those esters have all of those fruit compounded notes. You want, this still is technically designed to force more ester molecules over in the steaming apparatus to condense down and collect back into liquid. Thus, what we learned is by doing our very beautiful, if you can just go back one slide, by doing our distillation in an alembic Charente still, we're getting a very fruit forward new make. So to that point, I did not go to France and say, I would like a whiskey that tastes like creme brulee. That is not how I went into this process. I really went in saying, let's use 100% local ingredients. Let's use the tools and the techniques that are local and indigenous to this part of the world and see what happens. So out of this still, do we get a very fruit-forward new make? And then, yeah, then we have the barrels. And I swear, after we talk about the barrels, we are going to drink together.
Sure, let's do it. And I think that also, before we talk about the barrels, this is really how do you split the work in elaborating Brenne? It's like, okay, you helped the team, and it was different what they were doing before. It's also the way you are blending and the flavors you are looking for. I guess this is something different.
A little bit, yes. So when I met the family, again, they were making a version of what eventually became Brenne for their house spirit. So they did the farming, the distilling, and they threw it into whatever barrels they had around. And there was no organization, no system or anything to the barrel program. So when we became partners, I asked them, what would they like to do? They said, all we want to do is farm and distill. And I said, great. And so I took over the barrel maturation program. And really, I had to get in there and start organizing everything that they'd ever laid down, putting together a program just by trial and error and practice of what are the flavors that our consumers are going to love most for Brenne, and figuring out working everything backwards. So let me step back. We're the first single malt whiskey in the entire world, aged exclusively in New Limousin oak and Cognac barrels. So all of our oak is Limousin. Limousin is the species of French oak that we use. It is the most expensive species of the French oak available. So Limousin exclusively. Was there a question? No? Perfect. So only Limousin, and some of our barrels are virgin or new, and some of them have been used to previously age Cognac. So when we taste this whiskey, you're going to taste something that doesn't taste like any other single malt you've ever experienced out there. And that is intentional. It is not supposed to taste like adjacent to Scotch or anything that you may know, right? Scotch is incredible and doing all of it, their own things brilliantly. We do not need to compete. We need to say, cool, if you're doing that, we're going to do this. So this map that you have here shows you, the red dot shows you where the Cognac region is in the country of France. The little Brenne logo off to the northeast shows you about where our distillery is. And then just to the east of that is the Limousin forest. And the blue line tracks where all the forests are in France that produce oak that are used for barrels. For spirits, we as humans only use oak from the Limousin forest or the Trances forest. The other types of oak are used in winemaking. But Limousin is the most expensive of all of those 7 species of oak, and it characteristically gives anything it touches this creme brulee experience. So when I got to the distillery, they were only aging their whiskeys in New Limousin oak. And it was just very orange, like candied orange and vanilla cream. Like in the US, we have a dessert that's like orange sherbet and vanilla ice cream mixed together called orange creamsicle, which was like really like the tasting note that I found. And it just didn't taste as refined to me as I had hoped. So I asked them if we could start moving the whiskey into their cognac barrels. And this was a very important change for what eventually became Brenne, because these cognac barrels added all of this cooked fruit note. And you can see they're 400-liter barrels. They're quite large. They're more than double the size of an American oak barrel, and they're extraordinarily more expensive than American oak. So bourbon barrels, for example, are only done in American oak. They run a distiller about $200-300 to start. Our barrels start at 12 to 1,400 euros per barrel. So when you look at a 60 euro bottle of Brenne next to a 60 euro bottle of bourbon, just know we are putting so much more of that money back into the production of the process than anything else. And so these barrels are really our signature. You know, they really, with the distillation, with the barley, this is really where a majority of our flavors are established and developed. And when we started, I originally bottled in single cask releases for the US and used just crowdsourced information through social media, people's blogs and events to find out exactly which barrels our consumers were really loving. And then from that, I would pull bottles and send them back to France and tell our distiller, this is our new target. This is our new target. And so from that, we've really been able to develop this flavor in conjunction with our consumers and our community to create a whiskey that's as balanced as everyone has told us they have wanted it, which is a pretty cool way to develop a brand.
And you mentioned the two different barrels, and it's what would be in terms of flavor
Salva, I'm
profile?
sorry, you broke up again.
Excuse me, can you hear me now? Let's try. I was asking about the barrels, how different the barrels are, so in terms of flavor profile.
Yeah, so new French oak is going to give you vanilla, creme brulee, all of those creamy, beautiful, warm spices, cooking notes. And the XO cognac that we use is going to give you cooked fruit, a little bit of toast, some nut dust like almond powder and things like that, depending on the age of the barrel and how it was treated prior to the whiskey going in.
Okay, and what about the aging? So I think that one of the things that is more striking, and we'll see it later on the tasting, and when we talk about the tasting, is that it's a very, very different in terms of flavor profile. And is this because of I guess that's because of the aging also? What is the minimum age, and what is the average age we are aging Brenne, the state cask?
Yeah, so we do a state cask between 6 and 8 years old, which in the climate of the Cognac region of France, which is its own microclimate, but 6 to 8 years in Cognac, France is basically equivalent to 10 to 12 years in Scotland, just by temperature fluctuations and humidity levels in the air and interactions with the wood as the aging process occurs. Chemistry, not necessarily flavor-wise. But.
We were talking some days ago, and I think it's also the aging when we are aging in the Cognac region, and when we age Cognac, and the regulations of the Cognac region say that for a VS it's 2 years, for a VSOP it's 4 years minimum. Now they have changed the XO to 10 years, but the XO was younger than 10, exactly, was 6 years. So I think that we are also aging according to long aging according to the Cognac standards on that sense. So same region, same climate, and we are using older, as you were mentioning. So it's.
Well, yeah, and our barrels live next to the Cognac barrels. So the barrels that are aging Cognac and the whiskey are all in the same cellar, and it's a natural floor. It's right on property. You can see we only do 3 rows on the first level, and we've got another 3 rows on the second level. And also, since we're the first to ever use these barrels, we kind of own this amazing database of information, because if you age a whiskey for 6 years in a VS barrel versus a VSOP versus an XO, it's going to be different. If you age it in an XO that was under the 6-year or over laws, or in an XO that was 20 years or older, it's going to be different. If you age it in an XO barrel that had freshly been removed, the cognac, and then put the whiskey in, that's one flavor. If you let your barrels dry and age and sit out in the sun or not or wherever, and then you retreat them and then put the whiskey in, it's going to be different. So it's not just, okay, if you have a cognac barrel, this is the result you're going to get. It completely depends on a large variety of factors as well.
I see. Aging, cognac, and the age, and let's talk about tasting. What would be would you highlight on the tasting notes?
Well, before I share, could we do a little audience participation? Could we maybe drink together? And before we do that, I'm going to ask for a couple things. One, when you open your sample, I would love for you to close your eyes. You don't have to do it quite yet. You can close your eyes and just inhale and smell, right? And I want you to smell with your mouth closed and smell with your mouth open and breathe in through your mouth. And see if any memories, be them childhood memories or memories of travel or anything, come to mind, and just note them for yourself. And then if you're feeling confident and want to go off mute, there are no wrong answers here, but I would love to know what you smell before you even just taste it. But what might you smell? Especially because what I smell is going to be relating to an American palate, but we have so many different palates here. It's so exciting. Yeah, and just take yourself on mute if you want to share or write in the chat.
Like cooked pear?
Cooked pear, yeah.
I also think it's about bananas. I love this banana taste.
You get any bananas? I see some cigar smoking too at the same time. That'll definitely, Cedric. That's also going to give you a different experience in the whiskey. Do you get any flowers? Stone fruit, perhaps? Martin, I want to hear from you.
Peaches and cream?
Peaches and cream, yeah. What about any childhood candies?
Banana skids. The little banana taffy, yeah.
Yes.
I think Alex is going to get the prize today.
You win a bottle of Brenne. It's cool because those childhood candies are they're flavored with lab created, but basically ester molecules, and it's the esters that we're getting through our chemical process called distillation. So they're occurring naturally. They're not manufactured in a lab, but very similar molecularly. All right, so go ahead and taste it if you haven't. See if that enhances, if it changes.
Double chewing gum.
Definitely chewing gum. That's the molecule that comes off of the alembic still. So much bubble gum. Do we like it? What do we think? It's 40% ABV. So it's a lighter on the ABV, which I did intentionally because it allows for more of the floral notes to come through. And typically when we taste a whiskey that has a lot of these top notes of the spectrum, right? If an Ardbeg and Laphroaig is the bottom notes, those beautiful smoke, peat, iodine types of flavors, right? And Brenne is on the opposite end of that spectrum. Typically when we find whiskeys that are so expressive in the top notes, they usually dissipate or go away pretty quickly, right? You have them for a second and then they're gone. But I love Brenne at this proof strength because it does linger a little bit, you know? As I'm talking, I can like still taste it in my palate.
Any
Getting
food?
some elderflower up in here?
Say it again.
Elderflower?
Elderflower, yeah. That's a good one. Honeysuckle, do you get a little honeysuckle? Yeah, Francesco. It's pretty fun. So what do you is it different? For those who haven't ever had it, is this what you were expecting? Does it defy expectation? A taste of a pastry shop, definitely, Melinda. I know a French pastry shop is always my dream. I try and replicate that in my New York kitchen constantly. If you watch my Instagram stories of late, I've been working on baguettes.
And muffins.
Yeah, and muffins. If I can only get enough butter, I'll try a croissant. But
and
a cask strength available one day. Yeah. Linda, very good question. I don't know. So I perhaps I would love to share it. It's our consumer base in the very beginning. I was worried that if we put it out at cask strength, people wouldn't know to necessarily dilute it, which isn't a terrible thing. But if you just drink Brenne at cask strength, I think it's amazing. But you miss the floral notes. You miss some of those top end notes. You get a lot more of the grain, but you miss some of the cool floral that we spend so many years developing. Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, unlike any whiskey I've ever had. Good, that's the point. Right? Yeah. Our whiskey shelves, if we're blessed to have some collections, and I see some collections behind some of you, Francesco, you know, if we have a lot of them, I don't want to create something that is, you know, very similar to something already on your shelf. We have the masters doing that, right? So let's innovate and make something that's truly unique, but do it in a way that is authentic and respectful to tradition and the environment.
I think that also it's interesting because you have already mentioned some food pairing, but what about cocktails? I think that also we would like to know more about your view about cocktails, and I'll try to be a little bit different and innovative. It's like instead of asking your recommendations, I would suggest what was your last cocktail, the last Brenne cocktail you drank in New York before lockdown?
Oh, that's a tough.
Come on.
Out, like the last one I had out, out into the world I haven't known or seen in a while, like all of us. Okay, I was at Beatrice Inn. You can follow her on Instagram. She's amazing. Chef Angie Marr. And I did, I had two cocktails that night. They do a traditional smoked Manhattan where they smoke it in this like beautiful crystal, almost like cake server, and they take it out and it's like smoke goes everywhere. It's beautiful, and there's rosemary. And then I also had a Boulevardier, which I love. Boulevardiers are like the whiskey drinkers Negroni. So if you like bitter, if you like Campari, it's equal parts Campari, sweet vermouth, and whiskey. And I really love it with Brenne because the fruit notes and the vanilla tone down the bitterness of the Campari just enough that you still have a very complex, balanced cocktail, but it's not too aggressive with like a really aggressive tasting whiskey and an aggressive Campari. You know, it's not only reliant on the sweet vermouth to soften it. It's a very cool way to experience Brenne. And I've been drinking a lot of highballs.
Okay.
And they're delicious.
And those are easy to do, to prepare at home also, highballs. Yeah. So a Brenne highball?
A Brenne highball. My boyfriend has a Brenne old fashioned, at least one every single night. So I do buy this by the case.
Okay.
Mostly for him.
I see. And what is the cocktail that has surprised you the most in terms of Brenne? It's like, okay, I wouldn't have imagined that this cocktail or Brenne has changed that much or has made a difference in a cocktail.
Really good question. It's going to sound really simple, but it's the highball. I really thought, I actually like used to snub my nose at the idea of Brenne in a highball. It's 40%. So adding, 2 ounces of whiskey, let's say, to a tall glass, and then the rest with the sparkling water seemed like it would be over diluted. But when I found, and I've paired it with a Perrier, which is naturally carbonated from below the Earth's surface. It's one of 2 sparkling waters apparently on the market that are naturally carbonated. It has a lower acidity and more refined bubbles. And I found that pairing has worked really beautifully. and the little bubbles actually carry out more of those floral notes that I'm kind of obsessed with. And it doesn't over dilute the flavor. So that was really surprising to me. And I feel like you can also change it up by, if you add bitters, don't add bitters. If you do add bitters, you can add a variety of different bitters. So I've been drinking that almost like year round this past year.
Yeah, Arman is saying on the chat, it's highball with Perrier and lemon peel. It's a to-go destination. It's a French highball. Everything is French in that. So let's make sure that the lemon is also French, please.
Yeah, a Parisian citrus.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I think that's basically, I don't know if it's time. We have been 50 minutes talking about Brenne. We have covered more or less the things we wanted to explain in terms of elaboration, aging, tasting, and it can be a good time just to close with some questions. If you are all okay, just unmute yourself or just write it in the chat, and I'll just make sure we read it and we answer the questions. And while we wait for the questions, I wanted to thank you, Allison. I know you have been, I think you have been the last 2 days connected to Zoom, at least the last 2 days. So it's great to have you with us. It's great to have you on that time frame in for the European markets, and to have had the opportunity to know more about Brenne and how different, how unique it is. And I hope that we have all discovered some new things about Brenne.
Thank you. Well, and also just a fun thing about your market and pulling from Bart's bottles, Bart has some of the original packaging. So this is like a limited time availability. So if you love this is our original packaging, very near and dear to my heart, but they only have a few cases left of this, and then this packaging will move into the warehouse. So really cool. We launched with this in the US last year. We're excited to get it to Europe, although I will say this was my first child. So love these bottles and cherish them.
Allison, we have Alex just drinking something. I saw you in the small screen. I know, I'm really sorry. I'm watching. It's your turn. What are you drinking, Alex?
All right, I heard about the Boulevardier, so I had a little idea here from what I had in my bar. So I made a simple mix with equal parts Brenne Whisky, some elderflower vermouth, and some Suze. So it's kind of a spin on a white Negroni, but a white Boulevardier. Very nice.
Oh. Nice.
Cheers.
Robert is asking on the chat also if you could elaborate a little bit more on the blending. It's like you mentioned before the blending. What else can you tell us about?
Sure. So very cool. I started with single cask releases of Brenne, not cask strength, but individual barrels in the US. And those were really those original barrels that I discovered when I met this family. And then I moved that inventory into Cognac barrels. So it was aged for a total, this is old stock, right? Not what we have now, but it used to be aged for a total of about 8 years, and it would start in new French oak, come out, and then move into Cognac barrels. And then I would put all of that one barrel basically into a bottle and label that. Then I started working, at that same time, I started working on laying down inventory that was coming off the still in just new French oak and in just a large variety of different XO Cognac barrels, some wet, some dry, some young, some old, all the spectrum. So when we were at 2015, I had enough inventory in those exclusive barrels, anywhere between 6 and 8 years exclusively in those 2 different barrels, to start to marry them together and batch them, right? And I hesitate to use the word blend only because people might think blended Scotch. This isn't, it is a pure single malt, and most single malts marry or blend their barrels together. So very rare to find a single cask, single malt. But it is a batched expression. And so it's, for us, we are not, we're not following a ledger and going, okay, well, we need 12 barrels of new French oak and 6 XO in this way. That's not at all. We have a very specific texture and flavor compound that we're going for. And when I was at Yamazaki in the distillery in Japan, I was really inspired by, they have 12 stills, pot stills, I think on each, 12, 6 and 6. And whenever they have to replace one, they don't try and have foresight replicate every ding and everything exactly, which they do in Scotland, which is like this very incredible way of producing a still. Anyhow, in Japan, their whole goal is to just constantly edit and adjust and grow. And I liked this concept of, especially as a new category, right? French whiskey is so new. I was about number 5, 5th brand to come on the market. And now there's over 65 distilleries in France registered to make whiskey. So we are going to see over the next 20 years quite a big not resurgence, just bloom of French whiskey. So I thought, instead of doing one thing and saying this is what we are and then trying to replicate it year after year, I'd like to keep evolving. So we have a target of what our flavors are: creme brulee, bananas, Foster, cooked banana, bruleed banana in some way, and those kind of blueberry stone and stone fruit notes. And if we can continuously work our barrels to get that balanced and really silky on the palate, then that's how we'll bottle. So it's never an exact science of this number of those barrels, this number of the other barrels. We're really targeting a texture and flavor profile. And ideally, we just keep getting better and better and better at it. That makes sense.
Yep. Any other question? Nicola is asking about if we have experimented in finishing in one cask.
I can't say anything. I have a lot of fun experiments laid down. So yeah, we'll see. And it's really fun also. I've had some disasters. I mean, not disasters, but just stuff I wouldn't put my name on and put in a bottle. So I've sold some of those things to French pastry chefs who are more than happy to have an aged, beautiful distillate that isn't necessarily bottle ready or too obscure for a bottle. So that's been fun. Just the side hustle of selling not for bottled booze.
And Bernard is also asking about what kind of barley we are using.
Yeah, so two varietals. They're called Vanessa and Prestige. They're heirloom varietals. So as best as I could find and learn and understand, they are local and indigenous to this particular region of France. And they are 2-row barley. So for those who are beer excited, they are 2-row barley heirloom varietals. And we are 100% bio or 100% organic through the entire process. We're not just using organic barley. We are certified organic through our entire process. And really, part of the reason I didn't want to use bourbon barrels or sherry barrels is I didn't want to put a strain on the environment and have to move a lot of ingredients prior to moving the whiskey around. So that was in the early days a really big part of my desire to create a whiskey that was 100% locally made. And it's just so nice that finally the world is starting to pay attention to those conversations. But that was really important that we're not putting our barrels on cargo ships and moving them across the Atlantic to then rebuild them and make more fumes. So just using everything local.
Mm-hmm.
Good questions. Thank you, Alex. Good job so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll wait, and I think that Alex has won the award. I don't know, Roy. We haven't spoken about it, but we'll send you something. I don't know what, Alex. Thank you for the comments for the cocktail. Yeah.
We have two other
Oh.
questions. Which with French whiskey growing, what other brands excite you? If I don't mind sharing, I do not mind sharing. P&M has a very cool single malt. We cannot get it in this country. It is his 7-year-old single malt. It's different than the other single malt that he does, but his 7-year-old in particular is the one in Corsica that I mentioned. And what I love about this one is he ages, he's working with two different parts of our industry, a Corsican beer house, and he's distilling Corsican beer, and then he's aging it in Corsican wine casks. So very cool. If you like Cavalan Vino Barrique, which is a beautiful single malt aged in red and white wine barrels, you might also want to seek out the P&M 7-year-old single malt. I am excited about what Nicholas is doing at Distillerie du Paris, but I haven't tasted his whiskey in a long time. So I love his gins and vodkas and things like that, but I need to taste his whiskeys. He's just so cool. I also love the guys in Brittany. I think Warringam and Glenarmore, and I'm totally blanking on one that I'm going to kick myself after. But look at the guys in Brittany, France. Cedric, you might know the answer. They're just doing some really lovely things and working with some local grains. And in Brittany, it's very Celtic climate, and there's a lot of little peninsulas. So I know Glenarmore is putting his barrels like in a very rickety rick house on the peninsula, so it gets this saltwater air invasion. So there's very cool things that are happening.
And Elias is asking about which type of cellar do we age our whiskey, and also what is the crew of the XO Cognac barrels?
The cellar is a natural cellar, it's a natural floor cellar. It is a very historic building. It's just stone walls. You can see that beautiful, fungus growing on the outside, that beautiful black fungus, which is how in World War II, the troops always knew where distilled spirits were aging, as they would look at the sides of buildings for that beautiful black fungus growing, and they were like, barrels are in there. So you can tell which building is our cellar building. And then I don't disclose exactly the details of the cognac barrels. I do say that they are XO. For this expression, we do often mostly use wet XO cognac barrels, but I don't disclose exactly where on that range that we are using. Because we're the first, and we get to have something proprietary. Yeah, these are good questions. And our cognac house, by the way, I'm always so sorry that I wish they would love to be out here with me. They don't. They're very, very private. Very, very, very kind of French farmer mentality, and they're incredible humans, and they're always so surprised with how well it's done, which is nice. So, Nikolai, I couldn't hear you. You're on mute. Oh no. Oh, okay. Anything else?
Any other question? Oh, there we go.
Do you use the barley to make anything else? They used to. This family used to sell, before I got in there, they would sell the organic barley to organic cereal manufacturers. And they actually sold it malted, which is how they had a relationship with a malting house. So the malting house is also local. It's not on site. Very few people malt on site, even if they say they do. And it is off-site. It is, and then the barley is harvested in July, usually June, July, but usually July. And then this malting house actually silos the grain for us. And then distilling in cognac is only legally allowed unless you have other permits, from September to March, because that's the harvesting time of grapes for cognac. So our malting house actually silos and holds the grain for us. And then in March, they'll do the malting, and then we bring it back to the distillery. And after the cognacs have been distilled, we do a few weeks of distillation on Brenne, and it's only distilled once a year, which we were so blessed by our community. We had some real concern of people going, oh my gosh, with the shutdown, is this impeding your production? I said, no, our barrels are sleeping. This wasn't our time to distill, so we're okay. The barley's growing, the barrels are sleeping, everything's thankfully okay.
Bernard is also, yeah.
We pretty much keep them in the same cask until it's time for marrying and bottling. We also, I wouldn't necessarily like put this on the label because we change it up again often. But right now we're typically resting all of our barrels together in, I'm liking stainless steel, is pretty cool. I've tried it in wood before, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. But stainless steel, like large tanks for anywhere from 9 to 12 months. So really letting these barrels mature, like kind of rest together and come together before we bottle. So I mean, with whiskey, you're always preparing for like a decade out at minimum. So it's kind of cool. Like everything I do now is like what I'm looking at for many years from now. It's fun. Any fun label inspiration stories? How sweet. Yes. Thank you for asking. So the blue is the color of the doors on the distillery. At least when I first went there, they're like, with weather, they've lightened and grayed out a little bit. The barcode on the back, we've trademarked. I love this little design feature. And it's just a reminder that our whiskey is aged in 2 different barrels. Our little fleur-de-lis on the front and is incorporated into our new logo on the new packaging is actually a riff on a little motif, a design motif on the side of the still. And then the name Brenne is actually a spin of a French word for the part of the barley that we use to make the whiskey. And for me, it was so important to call the whiskey this because I could never pronounce the correct way to say the French word, which is B-R-I-N. That's the French word, and it's Brenne. But I could never pronounce that when I started going over, so I would just say Brenne. And my distiller would lovingly make fun of me. And at some point, he calls me, he goes, oh, Allisons, the petit Brenne is so cute today. And I was like, okay, this guy's gonna work with me. And we just became friends because I think he had a little compassion for my attempt at my French pronunciation. So Brenne is both where this like ex-ballerina from New Yorker and this, country French farmer distiller came together as friends, and also where the whiskey originates. So a true origination story. And then on the new one too, you'll see it's a little hard over Zoom, but it says grace et saveur across the front. And saveur is of course for flavor and taste, because it's really what we're known for when people talk about Brenne. They really are talking about the taste and flavor of our whiskey. But grace is a little nod to the gracefulness of the spirit. My ballerina passed, and it was my grandmother's name. So we wanted to just carry some matriarch love through through our packaging. Yeah.
Good. Craziest dessert you have made with Alex. Elias is starting to get the prize, so you need to.
Brenne pudding. So any like breads soaked in Brenne with cream and things like that. Banana Brenne Foster or banana flambe with Brenne is amazing. You don't need to use rum. You can use Brenne. It's fantastic. I am not this good of a chef, but I saw a chef, experienced it often, do Brenne creme brulee, which was delicious. It was so good. And then Question Master, yeah. I'm blanking on the name, but I've seen some other chefs do it where they have those little desserts, and you see them in France in pastry shops, and they have that little, almost like ampule, like an eyedropper that's usually filled with rum, and then you squeeze it right before you eat it. It like fills the cake pastry with rum. Doing that with Brenne has also been lovely. Oh yeah, a banoffee pie.
Yeah.
Maybe a crêpe Suzette?
Yeah, of course, a crêpe Suzette. And I soaked, also if you like Manhattans and you get fresh cherries when they're in season, soak them in Brenne for a week or two. They're fantastic as a garnish. Or if you have dried fruits, cranberries and cherries and things like that, rehydrate them in Brenne and then bake with them. Superb. Making me hungry, yeah.
It's dinner time, Nicola, almost. Yvonne is asking if we have any plans to expand the range or make another type of distill.
Oh, good question. I have no interest at the moment of making anything outside of whiskey and single malts at that. I have a dream of one day tasting what a rye could be out of our Olympic Charente still. But if you've ever even tried to make like a starter bread with rye and you've washed your hands, like I can't imagine the cleaning process of our equipment with the sticky rye. When I stand and I look at all the different pieces, I'm like, oh my gosh, that might be a disaster. They might kick me out of France if I try and do a rye in that still. Yeah.
And Elias is asking about outside France and the US, what are our biggest markets? Shall I answer that question?
Yeah, I was going to flip it to you, Sal.
Okay, I think that what we are seeing and what we are experiencing right now is that with whiskeys of the world being very relevant and becoming very relevant, all these markets where there is an interest and there is appetite to taste new things, and there's less traditional markets, are starting to grow and starting to grow very fast. So I would say that we are doing very well in the United Kingdom. We are seeing and we are experiencing, we had a training also in India recently. So we have actually one partner joining from India in this today. So we are doing very well and there is a lot of interest, and I believe that it will grow and grow because of this new world whiskeys and people being more open to taste different flavors and different origins from the whiskey. But if I have to say, our third market would be the UK, and potentially then would be Germany.
I would hope the Netherlands.
The Netherlands is the fourth, yes, definitely. Doing well.
We're so grateful. I mean, it's just, especially as an emerging brand, you feel every single bottle sale. And now at this time too, during COVID, when restaurants just shut down globally, a lot of the big companies operate about 20% in restaurants and 80% in the liquor stores. And for small and emerging brands, it's typically 50-50. So to have 50% of your income stopped immediately, it's not as bad as being a restaurant owner, but we've really been feeling it. So just a thank you to every person that you introduced to Brenne, that you perhaps buy a bottle of Brenne for or for yourself. Just thank you, because you really help us keep the lights on and we feel it. So, yeah.
Melinda is also saying adding it into a vanilla sauce for the bread pudding. Not bad.
Yes, and pour it over ice cream. That's actually one of my favorite. It's so simple. It's like a highball. It's like you just couldn't make something more easy, but it's so delicious.
We'll have to try that, definitely.
Well, I can't thank you all enough. This is so special. And Alex, I'm going to try that white Negroni version of a cocktail with some Suze and you did an elderflower vermouth. Go hunting.
Yeah, equal parts Suze, Brenne, and elderflower vermouth.
I love it. Suze. We're going to have to call it the Alex.
Definitely.
I think we have universal agreement here.
All right, cool.
The committee has spoken.
Definitely. Good. Shall I thank you, Allison? Thank you, everybody, for joining. It has been great time together. I think that we can continue that conversation, and if you have any questions, just send it to me, send it to Roy or the Bart's Bottles team, and I'm sure you will follow, and you are already following Allison on social networks. I would encourage you to do it. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you all. Love our whiskey community. Nicola and Cedric, Melinda, Alex, I can't even. Ah.